Chapter 63:48. Helena guessed that he must be going to see Charlie. So she smiled and said, "You can go to the bathroom over there in the banquet hall. Just go through the corridor on the east side of the first floor and walk straight to the end." "Okay, thank you, Your Majesty." Steve saluted very respectfully and then whispered to his father, "Father, I'll join you later, you and Her Majesty have a talk." "Go ahead." Simon nodded. In his opinion, Steve was just a foil today. And it didn't matter whether he was there or not, so he didn't take it to heart. When Steve arrived at the banquet hall, Charlie, Maria, Marcus, and Duncan were sitting at the huge dining table for dinner. Steve came trotting over, and when he saw Charlie, he immediately put on an excited expression, walked quickly to his side, and said respectfully, "Hello, Mr. Wade. We meet again." Charlie nodded, introduced him to his second uncle Marcus, who was sitting opposite him, and said, "Steve, let me introduce my second uncle Marcuson. You should have met him, right?" Steve naturally knew Marcus, but they had never had much of a friendship. Now that they met again, he stepped forward enthusiastically to shake hands and said, "Hello, Mr. N. We have known each other for a long time." Marcus smiled and said, "I didn't expect to see you here. It is such an honor to meet Mr. Rothschild." Steve hurriedly said, "Just call me Steve. Don't call me Mr. Rothschild, it's too distant. You are Mr. Wade's uncle, and you will be my good friend in the future. There is no need to be so polite here." Marcus nodded and said with a smile, "Okay, Steve, just call me Marcus in the future." Charlie introduced Duncan at this time and said, "Steve, this is Inspector Duncan Lee. I don't need to introduce him to you, right?" "No, no." Steve smiled and said, "I live in New York, how could I not have heard of Inspector Lee's name? I have heard of you for a long time." After that, he took the initiative to extend his hand to Inspector Lee and shook hands. Charlie then pointed to Maria beside him and introduced, "This is one of my sisters, Kathy." Steve saw that Maria was very girly, so he didn't think much about it, and subconsciously wanted to step forward and kiss her hand. Charlie stretched out his hand to interrupt him and said with a smile, "If one is not yet 18 years old, forget about the kiss." Steve didn't feel embarrassed and immediately withdrew his hand, saying with a smile, "I didn't expect Miss Lynn to be so young. If you have the opportunity to visit the United States in the future, please let Mr. Wade contact me. I will definitely arrange the best reception." Maria nodded politely and smiled, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Rothschild." Charlie looked at Steve and asked curiously, "Steve, why don't you accompany your father on the tour? Why do you come here to see me?" Steve couldn't hide his excitement. "Mr. Wade, I want to tell you that I have reached a consensus with my father and plan to set up a Rothschild family office in the Chinese mainland, which will be responsible for the family's investment in China. At that time, this family office will be fully responsible for me, and I will go to China in person to be in charge of all the business of this office. The family will invest $50 billion in the first batch to increase investment in China. I plan to set up this office in Ores Hill." Charlie was not surprised by the news. Steve was a smart man. After he came to Ores Hill last time, he would definitely understand that he was his current benefactor. It would be the best choice for him to develop in Ores Hill in the future. Of course, this would also make it easier for him to control him. So, Charlie smiled and said to him, "Steve, then I would like to welcome you in advance on behalf of Ores Hill and its citizens." Steve said excitedly, "Please rest assured, Mr. Wade and the people of Ores Hill. I will do my best to contribute to the construction of Ores Hill." Charlie was stunned. "Who did you learn this skill of speaking from?" Steve smiled and said truthfully, "I have been catching up on a lot of Chinese film and television works recently, all of which reflect the World War II period. So, here comes my learning."